Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Medicower on Iqra TV. This is the second part of the programme where we've been talking about musculoskeletal problems, which for many of us are to do with our joints and aching joints and muscles. I'm speaking to Dr. Susie Power again. Thank you, Susie, for the information you've been giving us. Before the break, we were actually talking about pains that also come into our hands. And I think one of the questions I wanted to ask you about that is to do with, I think it's the hands and arm, is carpal tunnel syndrome. What's that about?
Yeah, so carpal tunnel syndrome is a sensation where we have nerves that run down our arms, and at certain points there are pinch points, mainly in our elbows, but sometimes further down as well. And those nerves can sometimes get pressed on, and that can send shooting pain down our arms, or even give us numbness into our fingers. It's an extremely annoying condition for the person who's suffering with it. It can affect both arms, and it's more likely to affect ladies during a pregnancy or people who suffer with diabetes. So pregnancy can cause you to retain fluid, so in your arms there's less space because there's more fluid, so the nerves get pinched on. And then with diabetes, it's partly to do with the way our nerves are affected in diabetes, so it can be quite an annoying problem. There is a surgery to help improve the problem, so it's something called a tendon release. So we actually do a small operation to release the pressure, basically. And that can be successful, or sometimes it's just conservative management, which means wearing a support on the wrists, or just resting or using some painkillers to help.
So we certainly need to reference that to the doctor if we're suffering like that.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, there's another condition that I keep hearing about in the community, and some of the women in the community, and I don't know if it's specific to women, they've spoken to me about how they've woken up having had a really comfortable night's sleep, but they wake up and suddenly their heels and their feet hurt and they can't walk properly. They're hobbling like old women, they're saying, when they're not old women. What's that about?
Okay, I think what you're describing is it's quite a common condition in men and women, but it can affect, I think it affects women slightly more, and it's called plantar fasciitis. It's a bit of a funny name, isn't it?
It is a funny name.
Basically, it's just referring to the bottom of the foot, and mainly the heel. And as you described very succinctly, it's pain in the mornings, particularly when you first stand on your feet. So like you say, you could be okay in the day, you know, in the night, but as soon as you put your feet down, your foot is touching the floor, the heel is having to stretch, and the tendons are having to stretch. That's when you're getting inflammation in that part of the foot. It can affect one side or both, and often it's to do, well, there's a couple of reasons it's to do with. It could be people who are on their feet all day, so it used to be nicknamed policeman's foot. So this would be the old bobbies who are on their feet all day in very heavy shoes, and it would just increase the pressure on the ball on the heels of the foot and cause the inflammation in that part. It can be to do with poor footwear, or it can be to do with the way our feet are shaped. So some people are born with flat feet, or they develop because the type of shoes that they wear. The arch of our foot becomes flat instead of bent, and this impacts on where we're striking our heels when we're walking. So it's a very painful condition and can stop people from walking even 10 yards. And in terms of treatments, there are different ways of dealing with it. One of them is helping to support the muscles that attach to the foot. So the back of our calf and our hamstrings are implicated in the problem, because when these are tight, it stretches the bottom of our heel as well. So we can do strengthening and stretching exercises of our hamstrings. We can wear insoles in our shoes. It helps to support the base of our, to lift the arches up and help support the heels that we're striking our feet right. Painkillers sometimes, or anti-inflammatory medication is needed, but often it's a case of resting actually for the pain to go away, but it can take 6 months or more in certain people to go away.
So it can go away?
Yeah, in almost everyone it will go away, but it can come back again as well.
I think I was speaking to a physiotherapist and she was talking about the importance of stretching that foot out, and I think she was describing how you put your toes against the wall.
Yeah, so it's part of one of the exercises that you can do, stretching both the hamstrings and the calf muscles, but the feet as well, because they're a muscle I think that we don't always think about using. We maybe think about our biceps, but actually we use our feet all day, every day, but we don't don't think about strengthening them.
So what about women in our community who are wearing sort of the footwear? What kind of footwear should we be encouraging people generally, men and women?
Sure.
Because you'd kind of think of Bobby on the Beat's got good footwear.
Yeah, it's more to do with the fact that they're walking all the time.
Okay.
So comfy shoes that are well fitted, are supportive in terms of the heel, so they've got a nice supportive cushion to the heel. So smart shoes or trainers that have got a nice heel.
Trainers don't go with our outfits at all.
I know.
So we're going to have to find a nice
high heels quite often help the pain. So when you're wearing heels, because the way you're stretching your foot, it often helps with the pain, but it's not the cure.
No. No, and I can imagine that does other things as well. Yeah. Okay, so being able to support your foot correctly, lift the arch, sounds like the sort of way forward.
That's right, yeah. Now, there are podiatrists or chiropodists who deal with feet, and they can advise you how you're actually walking and how that's impacting. Do you need to have an insole? And even the high street stores can provide you with that type of information.
So certainly treatable by the sound of it.
Yeah, very treatable.
Okay, that sounds great. There's another condition that I've heard of called bursitis. What's bursitis?
Well, bursitis means inflammation of the bursa. A bursa is essentially like a fluid-filled sac, a jelly-filled sac, if you will, of the main joints of the body. So the knees, the hips, the elbows.
Is this that shock absorber part of the
Yeah, it's a little
joint?
bit of the shock absorbing again.
Okay.
So instead of the oil, this is the shock absorber.
Right.
So our body is a little bit like a car in some ways. And that bursa can become inflamed or even infected in certain people, and it can cause swelling and pain and reduction in movement, pain on walking or using that joint.
What causes it then?
We don't always know, so there can be a few causes for it. So potentially it could be an infective cause, so maybe a foreign body after an operation, or the skin, there's been a cut in the skin and infection has got in, bacteria has got in, and that causes a reaction. But we don't always know when it's not infective that there are, it could be to do with an underlying condition like an arthritis. So the process of arthritis itself can cause inflammation, but we don't always know. It could be from overuse of a joint. But it can be very difficult for the patient to deal with because it's extremely painful, especially if it's in the big joints.
Yeah, and I've heard you can have it in shoulders and hips, and that's where I've heard of it.
That's right, yeah.
So it can be difficult to sleep because it's on
Very
areas that you might be leaning on.
Yeah, and in terms of treating it, we have to think about it being an inflammatory cause. So we need to think about, do we need anti-inflammatories or ice packs, resting the joint, but occasionally we need to use something called a steroid injection, which goes directly into the joint. So a needle into the joint, sometimes done with ultrasound, depending on which joint is involved, and this can help to reduce the swelling of that joint. But in some people it's not effective.
No, and I guess there's also the worry about using steroids on a regular basis.
Sure.
I certainly know that I've been speaking to people who've used cupping, and the person that I know who's used cupping has actually said that it's made a massive difference to the quality of her life, and I just wonder if that's something that you'd heard of.
I know people have tried it, so different things like acupuncture, cupping, all these therapies have got their uses, and you know, there's no harm trying it. If it works for somebody, it can help reduce the inflammation in one part of the body, then I don't see a problem with it.
Yeah, I think even dry cupping can release the tension, and the wet cupping I think has given people a lot more long-term benefits. But like everything, I guess everybody's got to try and see what suits them the most. Yeah. That's really good. Okay, anything more about bursitis we need to know about?
I don't think so.
Okay. I wanted to talk to you about the mineral deficiencies and things around vitamin D and magnesium. Vitamin D we referenced earlier when we were talking about supplements for even breastfed babies. And what how much vitamin D do we actually need to stay healthy?
Okay, it's a really good question. In terms of kind of how much we would daily need to take as a supplementation, the guidelines are that we all would take about 10 micrograms a day. Now that comes in a capsule format or a tablet format, and there are non-gelatin versions or well-approved
halal ones,
halal-approved capsules that are available in all the pharmacists and health food stores. But also the dose depends on how much you're getting from other sources.
Okay.
So most people will get vitamin D from sunlight. So it's not really through their diets. The majority of people, especially during the summer months, will get their vitamin D purely from the sunshine. Okay. Now that means in a kind of a summer's day, or a well, not a Manchester day, but an average summer day, you could spend about 20 to 30 minutes in the sun with your face and your forearms exposed, and you would expect to get enough vitamin D.
Okay.
Now, obviously, that's dependent on a couple of factors. So the weather, your skin type. So the darker your skin type, the more likely you're not going to absorb that vitamin D. Okay. So the pigment in your skin can block out the absorption from the UV rays.
And then I guess for women like me who cover, you know, some of our sisters, they wear the veil, the niqab, and, you know, what can we do to support them who are also going to need vitamin D supplements? Sure.
Well, I think we have to accept that there isn't going to be enough absorption through the skin in the people you're talking about, and especially in the latitude that we're at in the UK, we're not getting enough sun anyway.
That's even for the English community.
For most
here,
of the,
isn't it?
yeah. So our current advice is that for Caucasian skin people, they should take supplementation during the winter months. So that could be from September through to the end of March. Okay. In our South Asian population, so where I work, I advise all my patients to take a daily supplement. That's throughout the year. That's partly because of their, they like to cover up in terms of their dress, but also because of their skin as well. So a daily supplementation of 10 micrograms every day. Alternatively, you can use it as a once weekly preparation, so there are higher strength tablets. Again, you can buy them over the counter, and this will be to prevent any vitamin D deficiencies.
You know, within our homes, we're not covered, you know, unless we're around guests and things.
Sure.
So if we have the sunshine coming through the window, is that as effective, or would it be the same?
It's not as effective. So even through a window, because of the way UV rays travel, so UVB rays are what carry the essentially, well, how we produce vitamin D in our skin. So even a window can block out some of that, the UV rays. So
but you could get some.
It's very limited.
Okay. So not to rely on it.
So it's not enough to rely on, certainly not here.
Okay,
no.
All right. Well, that's useful to know, because I think sometimes I've often thought, well, if I'm in the sunshine in the house, you know.
Even when you're driving, it's the same concept. Your windows stop the UVB light rays getting through, so effectively you're not really getting that exposure from the sun.
So for us it would be supplements then, and is diets, can we do things with our diet to help increase that?
Yeah, so there are some sources of vitamin D in diet. In terms of kind of places where we could get it from, there are fortified foods, so cereals particularly are a good source, especially for kids. So fortified cereals, look on the box to see what their recommended dose allowance is for the vitamin D. Cheese, egg yolks, but there are not a huge amount of fish, so tuna, mackerel,
the
salmon.
oily ones. Okay.
Those three are particularly high.
And you said cheese. Which cheeses are we talking?
Any cheese.
Okay, even the soft ones.
Soft ones.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay.
But it's negligible in terms of the amount that we're going to get in our diet anyway. So, but they're the types of food that you can take to boost up your vitamin D. Okay.
So vitamin D really important. So what's going to happen to us if we don't have enough vitamin D?
So we're talking about deficiency of vitamin D. Why do we need vitamin D? Well, vitamin D is really important for healthy bone growth. So it works with calcium, which I'm sure you've heard of as well, as one of the minerals. It helps to help strengthen our bones. Okay. Without vitamin D or having a deficiency, in terms of how could it affect us? Well, if we have a mild level of vitamin D deficiency, we might feel tired, we might have these generalised aches and pains, our muscles might hurt, we will have no energy. if we have really severe deficiency, it can lead to a condition called rickets in kids.
It's a long time since we've heard of rickets in this
Well,
country,
you'd be
isn't it?
surprised. So actually in areas where we've got high ethnic communities, it's not that rare.
Really?
That's because kids aren't taking the supplements and they're not getting enough through sunlight. So it's made a surge and it is back. So rickets does exist still, so we have to prevent against it. In adults, you have a condition called osteomalacia, which is slightly different to rickets because our bones have already formed, but they still become a bit softer and malformed. So
I've heard of osteoporosis, but not osteomalacia, you said?
Yeah, that's
What's the difference?
Basically, it means soft bones.
Okay.
So it's to do with the way that the bones work. So osteoporosis is about the structure and about how it's built up and then broken down. There's a problem with that process. Osteomalacia, there isn't enough vitamin D and therefore calcium to absorb into the bones, so they become a bit softer or crumblier. Back to our cheese again, and maybe a Lancashire cheese.
So I mean, I'm sort of thinking when I'm listening to this in terms of how long do you have to be deficient from vitamin D to sort of start to get problems like that?
Well, in kids, not that long. So I've had 1-year-old patients who have been vitamin D deficient and developed rickets. So it's a very quick process because they've got a really high bone turnover because they're growing and they're laying down bone. In adults, it does take a lot longer, but you will start to have some of those symptoms beforehand of the tiredness and the aches and pains. So if you're ever found to be vitamin D deficient, actually it's really important that you then continue to take a daily supplement to help prevent it again. There are higher strength treatments for deficiency, so you can get that from the GP as a tablet, and in some places they even use an injection to help you.
If it was that low?
If it's very low, yeah.
Okay, so if I was a mum worrying about this with young children, at what point should I be, I mean, how's the doctor going to find out? Is it a blood test or something else?
So that's how we would diagnose it in terms of a level, so to see is somebody deficient or insufficient. So there's kind of different levels. So they have a normal level, are they just a little bit under, or are they actually deficient? So that's tested by a blood test. But obviously we go by the history as well. So you know, if a kid comes in and they haven't been taking any supplementation, even though they're in the age bracket of 6 months to 5 years, they haven't been taking it, I might start to have alarm bells. If they're having the symptoms we just talked about in terms of tiredness, complaining that they've got aches and pains everywhere, and that persists, because obviously you get kids quite often saying, oh my, you know, everything hurts.
Well, my grandson often talks about leg cramps, and I often think it's when he's been jumping around the most. And
or growing pains.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, is the pain to the degree where they're waking up? You know, that's when you need to start to worry. Or are they really complaining about it all of the time? And are there any risk factors? So what ethnicity are they? Do they get enough sunlight? Are they having a good diet? So you build up a picture and think, okay, actually we need to test this person for a deficiency. Or the symptoms aren't that bad, advise them to start taking a supplementation.
How would you give a supplement to children? Would you wouldn't necessarily give tablets, would you?
No, it comes in drop form. So the government's campaign for the Healthy Start vitamins, it's 5 little drops of a vitamin with the A, C and D in it. So yeah, not a tablet. There are chewable tablets that you can get over the counter as well. So all the
they're not always halal, those though, are they?
No. So again, there are some that have been passed by the Muslim Council as being okay.
So I guess it's a case of just having a chat with your pharmacist.
Exactly. The pharmacists are very helpful with that.
I agree. Okay. Anything else about vitamin D we need to move on?
No, I think that's. I think it is really helpful to be aware of it, especially in communities where there's higher risks. There's even more evidence coming out that vitamin D might have a role to play in coughs and colds. During winter time, we're much more prone to viruses. And is that because our vitamin D levels are low? So there's even more research coming out, even against certain types of cancer. So things are evolving. The guidelines have only been there fairly recently. Like you said, you don't remember hearing much about it. In other countries, they deal with it differently. So France fortifies their milk. So all the milk that you get from the shops but that's not something that we do in the UK. But maybe that will become a next step to make sure we prevent rickets becoming actually a real big problem again.
I mean, I guess it also links back to how we're producing food in the West as well. That those things have changed so dramatically that I know lots of us have serious concerns about the mineral deficiencies because of the way the soil and and even the livestock are being fed, and you know, that's perhaps another topic for another day.
Definitely.
But I think that's one of the things that as a mum and a grandma I often worry about in terms of, you know, we're trying so hard to make sure that we eat healthily, but at the same time, even when we're paying a lot of money for fruit and veg, we're not actually getting the health. We don't believe we're getting the health benefits that we should be getting if they were produced without all these extra things in the soil.
I think it's really difficult, and you know that the same applies to things like antibiotics. They're used heavily in the food chain, and there's very little restrictions on that. Whereas perhaps in medicine we have more restrictions on when we can use certain things. That doesn't exist necessarily in the farming world, and we don't know what we're necessarily putting into our kids, you know, our kids' bodies.
It's becoming more and more of a concern, I think, and I guess we need to talk to our politicians about this a bit more than perhaps our doctors.
Well, I think it's important that we all make sure we're eating healthily as a start. So home cooked, fresh food as you can get it, and if you're choosing, if you can afford or you can access local food, because that's normally there's been less of a delay, there's been less freezing, there's been less chemicals put in. So choosing that type of food really helps. But yeah, it is a governmental issue.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I could talk to you about that for a lot longer, but I need us to move on. One of the questions I had in from one of the women in the community, somebody called Fozia rang in, and she said, I wrote it down word for word. She said, given that the NHS doesn't test for mineral deficiencies when we have an increased awareness of the problems these cause to our health, and we've just been talking about that, do you think the NHS is likely to change its position on this soon? And she's particularly talking about magnesium deficiency. What's magnesium for?
Well, it's one of the nutrients that we require for good health. So we need it in very, very small amounts. We call it a trace nutrient, and there's lots of other examples of that. But magnesium basically works at a cell level, so it works in every single cell of our body, and is involved with how our cells work electrically and the flow of other things inside and out. So we need it for every single part of our body, really. It's an integral part of our makeup and how we work. But it also has a slightly different role in terms of bones and bone health. It can help calcium be transported into bones. So I think that's maybe what she's getting to here. If we have a low level of magnesium, then if we're having lots of calcium without that, the calcium can be deposited in different parts of our body, but not within the bone. So it's not doing the job it should do.
I mean, I guess this is what worries me on a personal level. I'm thinking, you know, how would we necessarily know? Because I don't want to spend my whole life being on supplements. I want to be able to rely on, you know, the foods that we think are good for us that contain these things. So which foods would contain magnesium, and are they sufficient for us to use now?
So most people will have normal magnesium levels. It's quite an unusual case to have a low level or a high level indeed of magnesium. In terms of food groups, we're back to fish again. So fish is quite a common source of magnesium. Salmon fulfills almost all criteria for any of your trace elements. It's important to have at least 2 portions of fish if you can a week into your diet.
We're talking about oily fish.
Yeah, but like I say, salmon covers almost all the bases for most of the trace elements. I have to say I'm not 100% up on all the different other types of foods for magnesium. And part of that is because it's very rare to develop a low level of magnesium.
I'm going to actually let you stop it at that, just because we're running out of time, and I'd love to let you finish that, but I want to get your top tips out of you before we end the show.
Yeah.
So thank you, and apologies for cutting you short there, Susie. We've been talking about musculoskeletal conditions throughout the programme.
Yeah.
What are your top tips for our community out there and how they can look after their joints?
Okay, I think a lot of this is actually down to you as a person and a family. There are a lot of things you can do yourselves that can prevent any of these problems. So right from being a kid, keeping yourself as being active as you can, so doing exercise for adults at least 4 or 5 times a week for 30 minutes, and kids even more, getting into that habit of having a good lifestyle, even if it's part, like I said before, part of after your prayers, you're doing your stretches. It doesn't have to be anything crazy like going on a marathon.
Build it up gradually.
Building it up gradually, whether it's yoga or stretches or swimming, the different types of exercise, it doesn't matter what. And then it's also about nutrition as well, so making sure you've got a really healthy diet in terms of fresh fruit, vegetables. I would normally say a Mediterranean diet, but actually it doesn't really matter what the name is, as long as it's got lots of fresh fruit and vegetables in it. It doesn't really matter what it is, because there's good impacts of fasting as well on health and outcomes there.
Okay.
But I think they're probably my main tips about avoiding any musculoskeletal problems, but being aware of any of those red flags that we talked about.
Thank you so much. It goes so quickly the time when we're having
indeed.
fun, doesn't
Yeah.
it? But thank you so much for coming all the way to talk to me today about the condition.
Thank
and I
you.
look forward to welcoming you back again in the future. Okay, everybody, I'm afraid it's time to end the show, inshallah. I hope you'll remember us in your du'as and that you'll take good care of that body of yours. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.